because a patient can ride his or her car and drive to the other sector where there is an abundance of physicians there and get checked by a family practitioners. Then they looked at OB. They found the same thing, but they said, we have to work on this. Because why? It's different than a doctor looking for a family practitioner versus a woman in labor and delivery, and she needs to find the OB, she needs to go to the hospital and get an OB to deliver. That means she won't be able to drive from one sector to the other. So that is a quantity and quality that needs to be fulfilled. It's not only enough to say it, so obstetrics, tawleed is the same as family practitioners. That doesn't mean that OB is better. No, but for women who are in labor and delivery, it is more important to have a doctor at reach. And I've faced this, believe me. One time, I was doing what we call moonlighting in the States, and it was in a little town where there was nobody there. And it was a weekend, and everybody was invited to the wedding of the pathologist's daughter, all the doctors. So I was like really alone. I can only talk to them by phone. And comes a woman who was in labor, and she had a disease where the placenta was not in its right place at the end. Not everybody here are doctors, right? So I don't want to give you the medical terms. So, and she said, I'm about to deliver, and I did not have an OB to deliver that woman. And believe me, my knees started fibrillating like this. It's like I was really in a bad situation. And what we did is that there was another doctor from another part of town. I called the administrator and said, but the doctor does not have what we call privileges. He said, I give you emergency privileges. This usually takes about 6 months to give. And they gave it to me on the spot. He drove in 45 minutes and delivered that patient. So this is one thing of understanding the meanings of quantity and quality. Quality is also important, and it is part of the Islamic understanding. Allah has prescribed kindness upon everything. That means whenever you want to do something, you have to do it and do the extra mile. It's not enough just to fulfill and finish your homework or finish your job. And that's why I say to the medical students that our job is not from 7 to 3. It's when I finish the last patient, then I can go home. And that's when I sign out. Of course, but when you work in public, it's like there's something called, I call it the Cinderella syndrome. You know Cinderella at midnight, she turns into a pumpkin. And all the people who work in public at 2:30, they turn into, I'm not going to say what they turn into. Okay. Quality also. Quality, as I said, is also important. That's why today you find many, quality has been divided into many sections. Quality assurance, quality control, design, development. It's all to ensure that you have a quality thing. Now, in the 80s, Reagan came to office in the United States. And he was from the Republican Party, where it's the business people. And what they wanted is they wanted him to try to increase the taxes on the importation of Japanese cars. And he refused to do that. He said, no, you need to fix the quality of the American car to be able to compete. Just going ahead and hiking the taxes on the American car, the Japanese cars is not going to do it. So he understood at that time. And from that time on, quality of the American car started to go up until it was able to compete with the Chinese car. So freedom and tyranny, okay? This is, by the way, it's one of the most favorite pictures I've seen. This is in a German newspaper, and this is what they published in the front page. This word during the early days of the Arab Spring when everybody was marching on the streets. So if you look at it, there should be a balance between freedom and discipline. People are free, but at the same time, they're disciplined. If you go ahead and you say, well, you start suffocating freedom, tyranny comes and suffocates freedom, you end up in a society that you're not able to do anything. And what those guys do, they say, well, if I give you freedom, you're going to move all the way here, and it's chaos. And this is what a lot of people are using today in their argument against the Arab Spring, is that there is a lot of chaos going on in the streets of Cairo, in the streets of Benghazi and Tripoli, and what happened in Tunisia, and so forth. And however, that's not a justified argument. There has to be, people have to understand that they have freedom, but that freedom in itself contains the discipline of using that freedom. That means that's when I stand in line because I want to stand in line, not because I have to stand in line, for example. So that's also between freedom and tyranny. The path and the energy. If you want to travel, you pack before you travel. You put gas before you travel. And then your destination, the most that you can reach is how much gas you have. Because if you lose the gas in the middle of the way and you don't have a gas station to fill again, you won't be able to reach your destination. Not reaching the destination is something not good. Now, this is important because, again, in the Arab world, in the 20th century, in the second half of the 20th century, people came by what we call coups. They mean they were from the military and they just took power. However, a military person might be a good person in the beginning, but they are used, they're civilized, but they don't do with civil life. They do with military life, which is yes, sir life. And this is what the Arab world, for example, was ruled with. They cannot be able to rule like an institution, or like institutions like, for example, where there's separation of powers in the West between the judicial, the legislative, and the executive branches of government. That's important to understand as well. If this continues going on, then you end up with flawed results. And the flawed results in tyrannical places are always covered up because the one who committed them is above the law. And so it is not his job. In fact, if he comes and fixes it, he's the prophet that had fixed that. So all this type of bias that is going on in the society, of course, we were going through extremes of this society. And believe me, after September 11, 2001, the US went into that tunnel. But around the middle of the 20th century, when Roosevelt was about to be elected, or he got elected, in fact, for a third time, the Congress met and they said, we can't have somebody be elected for a third time. So they made an amendment to the Constitution. They said you can only run for office for 2 terms, or a maximum of so-and-so days. And that's what prevented the all or none, it's us or them, if you're not with us, you're against us, mentality of going on. Because according to the Constitution, they were able to drive somebody out of office and get somebody else in. So it did not go in. Shape and content. This is content. And this is a very clear verse in the Quran that said, and the cattle, He, God, has created them for you. In them there is warmth and numerous benefits, and of them you eat. So this is the content, okay? There is benefits in cattle. There is benefits in cows. We drink their milk. We eat their meat, and so forth. And wherein is beauty for you when you bring them home in the evening and as you lead them forth to pasture in the morning. So also, looking at cattle is beautiful. Just look at the Discovery Channel and where you're looking at the Serengeti and where they're showing you how animals, it's fascinating. So both are important in understanding. So one should not overcome the other. Also, Allah does not look at your bodies nor your shapes, but looks to your hearts. This is content, shape. When the Prophet also instructed his followers, you're about to arrive at your brothers, so fix your baggage and fix your clothes so you become like a beauty spot among people. So fix yourself, look nice. You should look nice, you should smell nice as a human being. So that has to do with the shape. So both are important. There are many also distorted dichotomies. I'm not going to go through all of them, but those are just an idea that we went through, for example, or we were going through in the past 20 years, and there's a big debate in the Arab world and the Muslim world that's about 1.5 billion people. Heritage versus modernity. That is, okay, today we live in a modern world, and some people say, well, we have to live according to what our ancestors lived in about 1400 years ago. So this debate is going on. Absolute versus relative. Faith versus knowledge. Do you get your faith through knowledge, or do you get knowledge from what you believe in? And there's a big debate in that. Determination versus ability is, if you determine you want to do something, are you able to do it? And if you're able to do it, do you need determination to do it? And this is what we call at-tasyir wa at-takhir as well. For example, and I've told this before, for example, the movie, Oscar-winning movie, Forrest Gump talks about this. Have you watched that movie, Forrest Gump? Tom Hanks. So it's a beautiful movie, and it talks about at-tasyir wa at-takhir, which is determination or I should say, a prescription versus free will. Is everything prescribed upon you that you have to do it, or you have free will? And he goes into the military where everything is aye, aye, sir. And his girlfriend goes into the hippies movement at that time where it is all free. And they show you how they interact through that journey about 20, 30 years. And you see the differences it takes you. And the most beautiful thing is the final thing when he talks to her about what he believes about destiny and freedom. Double standards. All of us on an individual level have suffered from double standards. We felt it one time. We've met a teacher that had double standards. He liked this student versus that student. No matter what you did, it didn't work. So we've all been subject to it, and human beings are very, very sensitive to it. They can smell it like from a mile that, okay, somebody's using double standards against me. So understanding what double standards mean is important. It's a rule or principle. This is from a dictionary, Oxford Dictionary, applied more strictly to some people than others or oneself. So this is just what a double standard means. So when you start negotiating, of course, the Arabs have suffered from double standards. The Palestinians, for example, have suffered from double standards. If the Israelis do it, for example, it's okay. But if the Palestinians do it, it's terrorism. If the Israelis do it, it's errorism. If they kill, for example, it's an error. If the Palestinians do it, it's a terror. So, for example, this has inflicted us for a very long time, and it led to the mentality of illusion. So, if those continue going on, so the language that we use, the rule and exception, the dichotomies or distortion of dichotomies, the double standards, if this continues and it becomes part of you, then you are bound to move to the next stage of bias. And this is, now you're going to be living in an illusionary bubble where everything is a conspiracy. You only see things according to what you see. It's a tunnel vision. And those who taught you this become sacred, and they cannot have any mistakes. And you won't be able to face the rule of the masses. Conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theory is a way to interpret history. So something happens today in history, and we always attribute it that it's somebody conspiring somewhere, which might be true, but it does not interpret history. And that's what I want to talk about. The early Muslims never believed in the conspiracy theory as a driving force of history. They believed it existed and that every nation had the right to conspire against others to fulfill its interests. But it did not drive history, because if somebody's conspiring against us, what prevents us from conspiring against them, for example? And this applies to every civilization, every country. That's why you see in many countries, and for example, the US and Israel have a very tight relationship. But what you see is that Israel has conspired, or they have sent, for example, spies to spy for their own interest against American interests. And that's why, for example, in the past 2 to 3 years, you've seen reports coming out of very prominent US officials, such as Petraeus, which is one of the top-ranking officials, and he's the head of